My name is Rachel Voss, and I was 34 years old when my parents sold my house. Not their house, mine. The house I had bought with 5 years of savings and 2 years of careful planning and the specific, focused discipline of a woman who had learned very early that nobody was coming to hand her anything, and that everything worth having required her to build it herself. My house, with my name on the deed, my mortgage, my daughter's bedroom with the purple curtains she had chosen herself, and the height marks penciled on the doorframe from age 3 to age 8. My home. Gone. While I was 3 states away at a work conference I had been preparing for 6 months. While my daughter Lily was at school, while I was sitting in a hotel conference room being told I was being considered for a promotion I had been working toward for 2 years. My parents had a spare key. They had a spare key because 18 months earlier my mother had asked for one in case of emergencies, and I had given it to her because she was my mother, and because giving your mother a spare key feels like the kind of thing a reasonable person does, and because I had not yet fully understood the specific way in which my mother's definition of emergency differed from mine. What she considered an emergency was anything that inconvenienced her. What I considered an emergency was my 8-year-old daughter coming home from school on a Tuesday afternoon to find a large red and white sold sign planted in the front yard of the only home she had ever known. Lily did not call me immediately. She was 8 years old, and she did not fully understand what a sold sign meant, but she understood that it was different from the for sale sign that had not been there that morning. And she went to the front door, and the key did not work, and she rang the bell, and nobody answered. And she sat on the front step for a while, and then she went to the gate at the end of the driveway because she did not know what else to do. She sat at that gate for 4 hours. Before I tell you what happened next, if you are new here, please subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where you are when you hear this. Now, let me tell you what my mother said to my daughter at that gate. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, called me at 4:17 in the afternoon. I was between sessions at the conference, standing in a corridor with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and her name came up on my phone, and I answered, because Mrs. Patterson did not call without a reason, and the reasons she called were always specific and always worth answering for. She said, "Rachel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm while I tell you." I said, "What happened?" She said, "Lily is at my house. She is warm, and she is fed, and she is fine." I said, "Why is Lily at your house?" Mrs. Patterson told me. She told me that she had driven past my house at around 4 o'clock and seen Lily sitting at the gate with her school bag, and she had stopped and asked her what she was doing there, and Lily had said she was waiting. And Mrs. Patterson had said, "Waiting for what?" And Lily had said, "Grammy came earlier and told me the house was sold, and I should wait here until Mom comes." Grammy. My mother had been there. My mother had come to the house while Lily was waiting on the front step, and instead of taking her granddaughter inside or to her own home or calling me immediately, she had told an 8-year-old that the house was sold, that she was effectively homeless, and that she should wait at the gate. And then she had left. It was 31 degrees. There was snow on the ground. My daughter had been sitting at an iron gate in the cold for 4 hours before my neighbor drove past and stopped. I said to Mrs. Patterson, "Is she okay?" She said, "She is okay. She is drinking hot chocolate. She asked if you were coming." I said, "I am coming." I said, "Please tell her I am coming and I will be there as fast as I can get there." Mrs. Patterson said, "Rachel, what do you want me to do about the house?" I said, "Nothing yet." I said, "I will handle the house." I called my mother. She answered on the second ring with the particular voice she used when she had done something and was presenting it as already resolved, the voice of a woman who had decided something and was informing rather than discussing. She said, "Rachel, I know you have questions." I said, "Where is Lily?" She said, "She should be at the gate." I said, "She has been at the gate for 4 hours, Mom, in the snow." She said, "Okay. Okay." She said, "We can talk about this properly when you get back." I said, "Okay." She said, "I know you are upset, but there were things that needed to be handled, and we can explain everything." I said, "Okay." She heard something in that word. I could tell she heard something in it because she went quiet in a way she did not usually go quiet. And then she said, "Rachel." I said, "I have to go get my daughter." I hung up. Emotionally, I booked the first flight home. I sat in the airport for 3 hours. I did not call my parents back. I did not text. I did not respond to the 4 messages my mother sent in those 3 hours, explaining and reframing and contextualizing. I sat in the airport and I opened my laptop and I started making a list. I want to tell you what was on the list because the list is the center of everything that followed, and without understanding it, the next 16 hours do not make full sense. I am a property attorney. I have been a property attorney for 9 years. I specialize in real estate transactions, deed disputes, and unauthorized property transfers. I handle cases exactly like the one my parents had just created. I know every step of the process. I know every point at which an unauthorized sale can be challenged, reversed, or penalized. I know the difference between a transfer that is legally complicated and a transfer that is legally catastrophic for the person who initiated it. My parents did not know what I did for a living in any detail. They knew I worked in law. My mother described it to her friends as Rachel does something with houses. She had never asked for more detail than that, and I had never offered it because offering it had never seemed necessary. It became necessary. I got home at 11 at night. Lily was asleep at Mrs. Patterson's. I carried her to our car and drove to a hotel because the house had new locks and I was not going to stand on my own doorstep at midnight trying to get back inside a house that had my name on the deed and someone else's lock on the door. I put Lily to bed in the hotel room. She woke up briefly and said, "Mom, is our house still ours?" I said yes. I said, "Go to sleep." She said Grammy said it was sold. I said Grammy was wrong about some important details. She went back to sleep. I sat at the small desk in the corner of the hotel room and I worked for 6 hours. I pulled the deed. My name was on it. Solely. There was no co-owner, no joint tenancy, no legal mechanism by which my parents had the authority to sell it. What they had was a spare key, a real estate agent who had either not done due diligence or had been given fraudulent documentation, and a signed purchase agreement that was not worth the paper it was printed on because the person who signed it did not own the property. I found the agent's meme in the county records. I found the listing, which had gone up 3 weeks before while I was in the final preparation phase for the conference, and which I had not seen because I had not been looking for it, because why would I look for a listing on my own home? I found the buyers, a young couple. They had no idea. They had done everything right, gone through a legitimate agent, made an offer, had it accepted, gone through escrow. They were innocent. They were also in possession of a purchase agreement for a property that had been sold to them by people who had no legal right to sell it. At 5:47 in the morning, I called my supervising partner at home. He answered because I had never called him at home before, and he understood that a call at 5:47 in the morning from someone who had never called at home before was a call worth answering. I told him everything in 8 minutes. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Rachel, do you want to handle this yourself, or do you want backup?" I said, "I want backup." He said, "I will be at the office at 7. I said, "I will be there at 6:45. The call my parents received at 11:17 that morning came from our firm's senior partner, not from me. I had decided, very deliberately, that the call should not come from me, because a call from me would be a family conversation. A call from the senior partner of a property law firm was something else entirely. I know this because my mother called me 40 seconds after she hung up with him. Her voice was the voice I had heard once before in my life, when her own mother had died. The voice of a person for whom the ground has just shifted in a way they did not anticipate and cannot immediately process. She said, "Rachel." I said, "Yes." She said, "There is a lawyer who says—" She stopped. I said, "I know what he says, Mom." She said, "Rachel, we thought—" I said, "I know what you thought." She said, "We were trying to help." I want to be precise about what happened next because precision is what I do and what I owe to this story. I did not yell, I did not cry, I did not deliver a speech I had been preparing for years because I had not been preparing for years. I had not seen this coming. Nobody sees this coming from their own parents. I said, Mom, you sold my house. You took my spare key and you listed my property and you signed a purchase agreement on a home that is in my name and my name only. And you did not tell me, and you left my 8-year-old daughter sitting at a gate in the snow for 4 hours when she came home from school and found a sold sign in the yard. She said nothing. I said, the sale is being reversed. The buyers are being compensated for their costs and their distress, and you will be responsible for those costs. I said there will also be a legal filing related to the unauthorized use of property documentation and the fraudulent representation to the real estate agent. I said, I want you to understand that I am telling you this as your daughter before you hear it from anyone else. She said, Rachel, please. I said, I have to go. I said, Lily is asking for breakfast. I hung up. I went back to the hotel room. Lily was sitting on the bed watching cartoons. She looked up when I came in and said, Is everything okay, Mom? I said, Everything is going to be okay. She said, Are we going home? I said, Not yet, but soon. She said, Okay. She went back to her cartoons. I sat on the edge of the bed and I watched her for a moment, and I thought about 4 hours at a gate in the snow and a grandmother who had left her there. And I thought, some things you do not let go of, and some things you handle completely and precisely and without drama, because drama is not the point. The point is that it does not happen again. The sale was reversed within 3 weeks. The buyers received a full refund of all costs plus compensation for their distress and inconvenience, funded entirely by my parents, who had received the proceeds of the fraudulent sale and who were now required to return every dollar of it, plus the additional costs their actions had created. The real estate agent's license is under review. The filing was made, the process is ongoing, and I am not able to discuss the specifics of it, but I want you to know that it is ongoing because I think it matters that things that are ongoing are acknowledged as ongoing, rather than presented as resolved when they are not. My parents have not spoken to me directly since the morning of the call from our senior partner. My mother sent 3 letters. I read each one. They are in a folder. My father sent 1 letter which was shorter and more honest than my mother's, and which I have read more than once because it contained 2 sentences that I think he actually meant and that I am still deciding what to do with. Emotional pause. Lily asked me once, about a month after everything, whether Grammy was bad. I sat with that question for a long time before I answered it because it is the kind of question that deserves a real answer and not a managed one. I said, Grammy did something that was wrong. I said, people can do wrong things and still be people. I said, what matters is what happens after. She said, what happens after? I said, that is still being decided. Pause. She nodded like that made sense. 8-year-olds are better at sitting with uncertainty than most adults I know. We moved back into the house 4 weeks after the reversal. The purple curtains are still there. The height marks on the doorframe are still there. Lily added a new one the week we got back and made me measure her twice because she was convinced she had grown during the hotel stay and wanted it documented. I measured her twice. She had grown 1/4 of an inch. We marked it in pencil the way we always do, and she wrote the date herself in her careful 8-year-old handwriting and stood back and looked at it with the satisfaction of someone who has recorded something important. That is what this story is about. Not the sale or the reversal or the legal filing or my parents sitting in a room with a senior partner explaining what they had done. It is about a doorframe with dates on it. It is about a child who sat at a gate in the snow for 4 hours and came home and asked if we were okay, and accepted yes as an answer because she trusted the person giving it. It is about what you protect when you have the tools to protect it and the clarity to use them. I had the tools. I used them. My daughter's height is documented on that doorframe for every year of her life, and it is going to stay there for every year that follows, and nobody is going to sell that doorframe or change those locks or tell her to wait at the gate again. Not ever. That is my story. If it stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.
Drop your city in the comments, hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.